patriarchy has this biological foundation to it, or most likely has a biological foundation to it. Everybody has gender. This is one of the problems with like lots of trans people, where I'll be talking about gender and they'll be like, who do you think you are to talk about gender? I'm a trans person. Why don't you ask me? Do only trans people have gender now? Is that where we're going with this? Do I not have gender? What are you talking about? You being trans does not give you any sort of expertise on this subject. Is that we're not creating boxes saying this is what you're supposed to do. We're creating boxes saying this is what you're doing. What does that even mean? I don't understand. You're just saying the same thing twice, but so listen. All right, let me explain. Everybody slow down. Chill. Just stop. Everybody stop. Just shut up. Just stop. Hold on. That's what gender is. That's what gender is. What do you mean? Stop. Gender dysphoria. The most blatant case we had for this was this guy named John Money. I see the point in gender, but not that gender stuff. Because it doesn't fit exactly what it is we would think of when we think of a chair. It's very different. And so the more different it is, the farther away it gets from the prototype. Because if you actually identified as feminine in any way whatsoever, you would look feminine. You would present that way. You would act that way. Like, it would exude in your presentation and in your performative. Like, it would. So I've been reading a lot of books about the differences between male and female brains when it comes to like gender differences and the way that people think like, oh, it's all socially constructed and yeah, it has nothing, we can just abolish gender and then it's gone. Like, I don't believe that. I believe that like men and women have like some fundamental differences in them that lead to other things that we can see, patterns that we can see over time. So things like, we know that like, girls within the first 6 months are more likely to be attracted to, or like, young baby girls are going to be more likely to be attracted to faces. They look at faces, they look you in the eyes. They like to be like touched, as in like some sort of like connection with somebody. They like the feel of like, something smooth or silky or those sorts of things. Like, we know that these are things that they like, that they're attracted to, whether it's that their brains light up in certain places, or they get higher rates of endorphins, or like all of these. We can see like what it is that they like, what it is they're attracted to, where their eyes go based on all of these studies that were done, versus boys, who are more likely to look at like some movement, some action. They want you to make weird faces, do crazy stuff with your hands. If you're looking at them and talking to them, their eyes are all over the place. There was actually this big problem where a bunch of radio programs kept putting out these commercials talking about how if your baby doesn't look you in the eyes within the first 6 months, then they're likely to be autistic. And so a bunch of parents started thinking that their kids were autistic, but they were just boys. They're just boys. That was it. And there were tons of kids getting taken to the doctor because everybody thought that their kids were autistic. And they were just boys. Boys don't look you in the eyes early on. And it's like something that they have to learn over time, is to look people in the eyes, because they're more attracted to other things. We even know that certain colors like red are more likely to attract boys, and colors like pink are more likely to attract girls. We know that that Barbie dolls, most girls were more likely to want a Barbie doll than they were to want a red fire truck, whereas boys wanted the red fire truck and not the Barbie doll. So like, we have tons of studies on this. We have tons of studies, and we can see this over and over and over. We also have tons of studies on grown adults, seeing that women, not just in the United States, but across like the entire world, are more likely to care about a man's finances than they are to care about how good looking he is. This is at like a 97% rate. 97% rate, right? We're talking about like, by far, this is a super de-duper majority here, where women are more concerned with finances than they are with looks. Whereas men only care about looks. That's about it. They care about looks. They don't care what job you have. They don't care about your education. They don't care, you know, if you're funny or goofy, or like, their main concern is, are you good looking? Are you attractive? Am I attracted to you? So yeah, so like we can see these differences between the sexes, but these display themselves in ways that are not just that wouldn't be categorized by sex. Like, we wouldn't categorize these things. Like, it depends on how you define sex. So if we're saying that sex is something like you know, gametes, well, I don't think these things come from your gametes, or if they come from chromosomes, like, it doesn't really come from chromosomes. Or if what if it's like we define sex based on like whether you have a penis or a vagina? Well, it doesn't come from your penis or your vagina. These things come more so from testosterone and estrogen. One of the things that I was reading in this book right now that I'm on, it's called The Female Brain. It's actually a really interesting book. Where they take you through the life of a young woman, and they start off with her as a baby and explain like what she's more likely to do, what she's more likely to like, what she's more likely to be interested in, the struggles of being a girl growing up and then eventually going through puberty and all of this sorts of stuff. And they actually explain why girls are harder to raise in their teen years. And the reason is because once estrogen starts going to your brain, and I know the women here are not going to like this, but I'm just relaying to you what the book says, okay? So it's written by a woman. It's called The Female Brain. It was a New York bestseller. It's a you know, very well-renowned book by Luann Biznendine, something like that. One of the things they talk about is the fact that when girls start going through puberty, estrogen starts to get pumped into their brain. And that estrogen actually does make you less rational. And that it makes you more emotional, which makes you less rational. So it's not just that estrogen makes you less rational. It's that estrogen makes you more emotional, sets all of your other chemicals and everything out of whack in your brain, and then you end up being less rational because you're more emotional. And the problem is, the huge problem with this is that, like, normally our brains will adjust to chemical differences and even out over time. But women can't. Their brains can't. It can't adjust. The reason their brain can't adjust is because it's only 2 weeks out of the month. 2 weeks out of every month, they're going to raise in estrogen levels. And all of a sudden, they're more emotional. And their you know, their chemistry is all out of whack. But then the estrogen leaves, the levels die down, and now they even off again. Your brain has no chance to adjust to this if it's never actually like taking if it's never consistent. Then your brain has no ability to adjust to this. So especially when girls start going through puberty, the estrogen levels first starting to rise makes them very impulsive and irrational, and it makes it hard for them to get along with people, especially authority figures. And that over time, their brains get more and more used to having the estrogen every 2 weeks, but it never like actually adjusts to those estrogen levels. And it never can, it never will.
Testosterone also messes with you.
Yes, but we don't have like heightened, our testosterone levels don't do this throughout our lives. Like, our testosterone levels aren't just doing this at all times. Whereas women's estrogen levels, they are. It's just doing this all the time, nonstop, just up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. And it's never like it's never something that their brains can actually adjust to. So when we're looking at these things, we can see like, okay, like based on like biology, the sex differences are pretty obvious. Like, we can see this through science. Now, if gender is a spectrum from femininity to masculinity, and femininity and masculinity are concepts or ideas. They're patterns that we've noticed over time that are more likely for a male to do or a female to do, right? Something that's feminine, we call it feminine because we think females are more likely to do that thing, just like with men and masculinity. It's because that we think this is stereotypical of that sex. So obviously, if it's stereotypical of that sex, biology probably plays a part into why it's stereotypical, why that's a common thing, and why it's something that we see a lot. It's a great book. Really enjoying that one. It's that's all due to colonialism. Right. Well, that's one of the things that they talk about is the fact that, like, this woman, hardcore, like, feminist, Luann Brizendine, she grew up a pretty hardcore feminist and believed that, like, all of these differences were just due to the patriarchy. And she wanted to, like, masculinize herself and be, you know, what all feminists dreamed of being. But somehow they were just never able to do that to themselves. They were never able to just stop being feminine or, like, move past social constructs. Lots of times it's fairly easy for people to move past something that's socially constructed. Once they know it's socially constructed, they can kind of, like, deprogram themselves and be like, okay, so now I see how all of this led to where I'm at now, but I can just kind of, like, clear all that out and start over and now move forward. But you can't do that with femininity, because femininity is, like, socially constructed in the fact that categorically we chose to categorize things based on what it is that's more likely for one sex or the other to do. But that's the part that's socially constructed. It's just like we chose to categorize things that way. Outside of that, once it's categorized, we know that these categories are coming from biology. Not 100% of it, and we can't even say most of it. We don't know. It's hard to categorize everything that's feminine or masculine and know how much of it comes from biology and how much of it comes from what's socially constructed or social expectations. We can't know these things. They even talk about at one point that, like, lots of times it's used as an example to say that men wore tights back in the colonial days. Men wore tights, men wore high heels, they wore makeup, they wore wigs, like, they even wore skirts. Like, they posed very femininely, what we consider feminine now. But these things, when they came out, the top brass, the rich people were the ones who were going to get it first because it was expensive stuff. It was hard to get. And you had to be part of the upper echelon or the upper class in order to even afford these things. And normally, so men were getting these things, heels, tights, all of this stuff, and they were wearing them first. Over time, it adjusts to where women end up being more likely to wear these things, or the only ones wearing these things, because biologically they are the ones who are kind of driven in that direction and men aren't. And so even if we come out with some new thing today, and all of a sudden, men are, like, the ones doing it, hardcore, right off the rip. They're all the ones doing it. But over time, it ends up being a woman thing, a feminine thing. There's probably some biological basis to why that is, why so many move in that direction over time. But we can't know. We can't know what every little brainwave means. We can't know what every little brainwave is saying or what it tells us. There's even parts where they talk about the fact that, like, oh, well, the amygdala is bigger because of this. And so there are some parts that they actually get wrong, where they see, like, parts of the brain that are larger in women versus men. But I'm fairly positive that parts of your brain being larger doesn't mean that you actually use more of your brain in that area, or at least we don't know that. We don't know that that's what it means. It could mean that. We have no idea, though. We don't have evidence to say that, oh, this part of the brain's larger in men and smaller in women, so men use this more than women do. We can't know that. Like, we just can't. But we can see...
Tom, say it. Give me a prescription.
No. Why are you always so confused as to what we're talking about? I'm always blown away. Like, if you want, I can stop and explain to you what we're talking about right now. There isn't a prescription involved here. When I'm reading books, they're teaching me things. They're not telling me what to do. They're teaching me about that thing. I am I'm relaying that information to you. I'm not telling you, like, you should or shouldn't believe this. You seem to be fairly anti-science most of the time, so I'm not going to tell you to believe in science or not to believe in science or whatever. But if your little woman brain goes burr, that's fine. We're just talking about information right now. And I've said this a million times. If people don't want, like, descriptive claims, or if they can't listen to things just being stated, this is how it is, this is not the channel for you. I can say this as many times as possible. This is not the channel for people who want some sort of prescription, because I'm not trying to push people in some ideological direction. I'm not trying to push people to, like, be part of this group, right? When I'm talking about going and debating people on the streets about their takes on Roe versus Wade, I argue both sides of it, because I'm not trying to push people in one direction or the other, just trying to get people to rationalize their positions. If you have a rational position and it follows with your beliefs, I'm cool with it. Like, I'm perfectly fine with people having different beliefs and people having different ideas. Stop pretending that a lot of folks use that biology to support their BS ideas about men and women. I'm not pretending that. I didn't say anything about that. That's the thing. I think you're confused as to what topic we're on right now, because nobody said anything about that. We're not anywhere close to that topic whatsoever. I like prescriptions. I like prescription, like, painkillers, mostly. Those are a lot of fun. How dare I ask what your opinion is? No, you didn't ask what my opinion is. You said, give me a prescription. But I don't have a prescription when I'm telling you. My prescription is read the book. That's my prescription. Go read the book. But yeah, they talk about the fact that, like, she was this hardcore feminist, and over time, like, she thought that, like, the patriarchy made women this way. But over time, like, they realized more and more, oh, the patriarchy actually, like, has to have biological standings to it. But we don't know what that is. We don't know. They talk about this in Sapiens as well. They talk about it in Sapiens and in the female brain. Is that the patriarchy has this biological foundation to it, or most likely has a biological foundation to it, but we don't know what that biological foundation is. We have no idea. We can't figure out what it is that makes us do these things. But we do know that even in hunter-gatherer groups, they had what we call alpha males, where, like, they had a protector. They had the biggest, oldest male who was able to, or was supposed to, protect the rest of the group. And that's even, like, from early on, like, they were just kind of in charge, just like with lions, where lions are meant to be, like, you know, the big guy with the mane. He's the one who protects all of the other lions, and he's in charge, and, you know, he's the alpha lion. And the women lions go grocery shopping and come back with zebras and antelope and stuff like that. But, like, it seems as though most people with positions that I, like, vehemently disagree with, we disagree not because we have different values, but because they're just wrong on the facts. Like, most of us have very similar values. We just disagree on the facts. And that's it. And so when I'm talking about, like, descriptive claims, and I'm saying this is this is that, this is this, like, I feel like most people with the correct information will all come to the same conclusions. They'll all say the same things. So yeah, I On by far the majority of issues, we all have the same values, and we're going to be able to come to the same prescriptions, and that's that. So yeah, I'd much rather go over descriptive claims and talk about what the facts are, so that you can come to whatever conclusion it is that your values would lead you to. Oh yeah. So I even posted this on Twitter the other day, kind of telling people that, like, yeah, I'm probably going to put like all of this information into a doc at some point. So I posted it and kind of like explained that like some of these things are actually connected. And so some of these differences that we see in men and women that we think are just socially constructed, they're actually not. Like a lot of them seem to be biologically connected in some way. Now, again, we can't know these things for a fact, but we can look at the information that we have and the evidence that we have, and we can say, okay, like this looks like we have evidence for one side and not the other side. We don't, it's hard to ever have evidence to say this thing is socially constructed. It's hard to have evidence for that. Normally we say something's socially constructed because we don't have evidence that it's not socially constructed. We don't have any sort of like evidence of something objective that would make this a thing. And so instead we just say, okay, well, it's socially constructed. So I posted on Twitter, I said, did you know female brains connect emotion and memory at a higher rate than males and devote 3 times the brain power to those types of events? Male brains are more devoted to sex, action, and aggression than female brains. We can see these in infant brains even in the first 6 months. These are characteristics we categorize as gender, meaning that gender has biological roots. This is only one example. There are tons of gendered characteristics that are biological, and these are consistent with trans identities as well. So yes, please stop saying that gender is arbitrary. Most of it isn't. I shouldn't have said most isn't, because we can't know most, like what most of it is or something like that. We can't know those things. But we know that like a lot of these things that we consider to be gender are biological. We have a lot of evidence to say this now. And so talking about things like abolishing gender is just, it's stupid. It's not a possibility. It's not a thing. The reason that it can't be a thing is because we categorize patterns. That's what we do as humans. That's something that we like are very good at, and almost too good at. Like it becomes a problem over time that we overly categorize things and overly acknowledge patterns, to where if I see more and more black people, like, you know, acting a certain way, I might just not like all black people now because I think all black people act this way because I noticed a pattern with a few black people, right? So it can actually be a problem for humans as well. But we notice patterns over time. So as long as differences exist between males and females, or men and women, we will acknowledge these patterns and categorize them as such. We'll just end up recreating gender again. If we abolish gender, we'll just recreate it all over again, because we will still see these patterns and want to categorize them. We will end up doing that no matter what. So yeah, it just seems impossible to abolish gender. I don't even think that that's like, it's just like it doesn't make sense. It's like saying like, I don't know, abolish blood. Like, let's abolish blood. Let's get rid of it. Do you want to get rid of humans? No, we're going to keep humans. Okay, well, I don't think you can get rid of blood. But it isn't strict. Well, meaning that, I'm assuming you're saying that like it's not rigid, like it's not like 100%. That's true, but it is like 97, 98% true. Like when we're talking about the differences between males and females, we can see these consistencies at insanely high rates. Gender is arbitrary, but abolishing it is stupid. It's not arbitrary. It's not arbitrary. It's scientific. It is not arbitrary whatsoever. It is literally scientific. I just went through all of this. It is scientific. Like, we can see these things. We can know how people will identify and the ways that they will act before they ever even do it. Arbitrary means that it's random and without purpose. That's what those two things, that's the two things that like normally make something arbitrary. It's random and without purpose. It's just floating in the wind. It doesn't have any reason or rhyme to it. It's just there. It's just doing things. Like for who knows why, who knows, you know, what it's doing. It's just doing it. No, gender exists for biological reasons and because we categorize things when we notice patterns. That shows that there is a purpose and a reason to these things. It's not arbitrary whatsoever. I think if we recategorize it again, it'd still be a lot less important to people. So there are studies done showing that in countries that have the least amount or give the most freedom between the sexes, they end up with the biggest differences between the sexes. The more freedom a country has, and the less, like, you know, social engineering, the less like restrictions they have for one gender or one sex or the other, the less of this they have and the more freedom they have, the bigger the differences become between the sexes. That they start like self-segregating themselves again. I'm not going to argue that people have personality types and it can have to do with biology, but the concept of gender, like they built it up to be, still nonsense to me. Again, these are just like characteristics of males and females that have nothing to do with their sex, but have to do with their biology or sometimes not to do with their biology. There are some parts that are likely to be arbitrary. Like, I don't know that there's anything about skirts that make women like skirts. I don't know that there's anything about pants that make men like pants. But for some reason, men are more likely to wear pants and women are more likely to wear skirts. That might actually be arbitrary. That might actually be because, like, some businesses decided to, like, you know, target women with skirts when they were selling them. And instead of calling them kilts and selling them to men, they sold them to women. Like, that could be arbitrary. But when we're talking about like things that actually fall into a category that we know is based on our biology, and that biology differs based on your sex, then it's not arbitrary by any means. It is a biological difference between the sexes. I like skirts because it keeps the dangly bits cool. Yeah, I could understand that. But I could also understand that maybe that's a biological reason for why men don't wear kilts, is because they got a bit more hanging out there. And if their skirt comes up, it's not really covered, right? Women could just wear underwear, and if their skirt comes up, you just see their underwear now. You don't see anything bulging out there. But if a man's skirt comes up, you see the bulge. You still see it all. So I could understand that there like a biological reason like that as to why men would be less likely to wear skirts. But I'm just saying, I don't know of any reasons. So that sort of thing could be arbitrary. But when we talk about things like men liking sports more than women, we know that this is biological. We know this. Like, and I need you to understand like how emphatically I'm stating this. We know this. For a matter of fact, the last 3 books that I read, all New York Times bestsellers, all 3 mention this, that men are biologically driven to like sports. They all mention this, okay? Women are biologically driven to care more about relationships and friendships and things like that. There was a study done a long time ago about the fact that people who request off more at their jobs are women. Women always request off more. Why? Because they request off things that men don't. They request off anniversaries. They request off birthdays. Birthdays for their kids. Birthdays for their boyfriends. Birthdays for their cousins. Birthdays for their aunt. Birthdays for their mom. Birthdays for their friend. Birthdays for their friend's friend. Like, they want to celebrate everybody's birthday and they want to be there for them and they want to buy them a gift. They always want to do that, and they're much more likely to want to do that than men are. Same thing with, all sorts of things. Women want to celebrate people. They want to be there for people, and they want to have those engagements. They're a lot more important to women than they are to men. We know these things. We know this. So, like, we can't keep saying this is arbitrary when we know it's biological. The differences are biological. We know this. So, like, it's we see these differences in the first 6 months of these kids being born. We know. It's not a question. We're not wondering. If a man is likely to have certain personality quirks, but they aren't exclusive, that's fine. But trying to make gender boxes for it is ridiculous to me. Hold on. When you hear gender, it sounds like you're hearing, we've categorized this as what you're supposed to do, right? Is that what you're saying? It sounds like that's what you're saying. What I'm saying is that we're not creating boxes saying this is what you're supposed to do. We're creating boxes saying this is what you're doing. We are acknowledging patterns that are happening in front of us. We see these things happen over and over and over, and we see, oh, men are more likely to do this thing, a lot more likely than women. We'll think of that as a masculine trait now. That's all it is. That's it. That's the end of it. That's all it is. It's very simple. We're just acknowledging the world in front of us and categorizing it. We look at patterns, we see them, and we acknowledge them. That's it. It's simple. It's not hard. There's nothing crazy about this. I just want society to be more accepting. Me too. And that's what I'm saying. This is what I keep trying to say, is that we can't expect society to be more accepting if we don't actually understand what parts we're supposed to be accepting of, right? We can't actually say, hey, you need to be more open to these things if you don't actually know what it is that you're supposed to be more open to. If we can understand that some things are actually like a biological necessity, these are things that you are driven to do without any other outside influence. You are going to be driven to do these things. We have to understand that that's something to be accepted of within these groups. Or if you're a woman but you don't want to do those things that are categorized as feminine, we should still be accepting that. Again, these are only descriptive claims. I am only explaining what these things are. I'm not saying this is what people should do or this is how they should act. You can be the most masculine woman in the world. I don't freaking give a crap. I don't care at all. All I'm saying is that biologically, that's a very unlikely thing. But it happens, and if it does, we should be accepting of it. That's it. Tom not taking off for my birthday. It's biology. I literally, I don't know anybody's birthdays, so. And a man who calls off work getting assigned a woman gender is absurd. What? We're not saying that he would get assigned a woman gender. What are you talking about? I said one is more likely than the other. That's all I said. That's it. One's more likely. I didn't say assign those again, you keep taking these things as prescriptions, and I am not saying this is what people should do. At no point have I said that. I am explaining what empirical evidence has told us. That's all. That's all I'm doing. There's only two people here who mix those two things up. More likely, but not 100%. So making restrictive boxes can be harmful. Again, we're going to do it no matter what. We're humans. We are going to do it. We are going to acknowledge patterns and categorize them. We will always do this. We always have. We always will. I agree things are masculine and feminine traits, but that doesn't make something called gender. You have feminine traits on a person whose gender is... Why do you do this every time? That's literally what gender is. It's feminine and masculine traits. That is what gender is. So like, I don't understand why you're always like, well, I don't think femininity and masculinity should be gendered. It's like, so I don't think H2O should include water. What does that even mean? I don't understand. You're just saying the same thing twice, but pretty sure gender is trying to be less accepting than I am. Gender isn't trying to do anything. Gender has no purpose. Gender has no goal. Gender is not trying to do anything. It's just a pattern that we've acknowledged. That's it. All I'm saying is acting a certain way has nothing to do with gender. That's the only proof of gender being presented. That's what gender is. That's what gender is. What do you mean? Stop saying the same thing twice. You're saying, you're literally saying, I don't see any evidence of H2O being water. It's like, you just said this. You don't have any evidence of water being water. You're saying, I don't think gender is gender though. Like, that's what you're saying. Masculinity, femininity, that is gender. That's it. Like, that is what gender is. That's what we're categorizing. That's what we're putting into boxes and saying, like, oh, this is something that's not necessarily based on your sex, but it is something that's more common for your sex. It's a pattern that we've acknowledged is more common for your sex. So we're going to classify this as gender. That's it. That's what gender is. Seth, I had said numerous times that these things were more likely. I literally said more likely every single time. I said more likely over and over and over. I said more likely every freaking time. Every time. I challenged somebody to go back and find a point where I said these things happen 100% every time. Like, every time I said more likely. You're not catching me out on something. Oh, finally he says it. No, I've been saying it the whole time. It means gender is a dumb concept. Just keep it as a mix of masculine and feminine traits in different mixes without boxes. That's the same thing. That's the same thing. Uru, you're saying the same thing. You're doing it again. You're still saying the same thing. You're saying a mix of masculine and feminine traits. You're saying gender. That is what you're saying. That is literally what you are saying right there. When you say masculinity and femininity, you are saying gender. But then right after, you're like, but I don't see the point in gender. I see the point in gender, but not that gender stuff. No way. I only want gender. But no gender. I know that for sure. Gender's fine. But what's not fine is gender. This is what you're doing over and over and over. Like, this is over and over and over what you're doing. Like, I look, Tom, I get it. Gender's fine. I just don't like gender. But I like gender, just not gender. But listen, Tom, listen. Gender makes sense. I can understand categorizing gender. I just don't want us to categorize gender. This is what you're saying over and over and over and over and over. Like, my head is going to explode here if you keep like, listen. I understand. H2O is fine. I want H2O. I don't want water. Don't give me water. Give me H2O. It's the same thing. You're saying the same thing. I'm so happy Tom's streaming again. Gender is with boxes. I'm saying Get them boxes out of here. They are dumb. But your boxes still exist with masculinity and femininity. Those are still boxes. Those are categorizations. Masculinity is a categorization. Femininity is a categorization. You still have those categorizations. You are saying you're fine with those categorizations. That means that you're fine with gender. That's the same thing. They're both boxes. They're all boxes. They're all categorizations. That's what they all are. I assume when you guys say boxes, are you sure you want to stop the stream? No. Okay. I'm assuming when you guys say boxes, you're saying categories, right? This is what we're saying, right? What we're saying is pretty close. The thing we're talking about exists, but categorizing it like they do is arbitrary. Yeah. It's not arbitrary. It is a social construct, but it's not arbitrary. It is direct, defined, with purpose. There are patterns. Like, it is not arbitrary. It's the opposite of arbitrary. It's like the most unarbitrary thing ever. I'm saying categorizing it as something as binary as gender is dumb. There's way too many mixes. Well, that's why we say gender exists on a spectrum. That's exactly why we say gender exists on a spectrum. It's like you're saying we have two liquids. One is water, one is acid. All these combinations are water, and all of these are acid. Right. And it's like you're saying we're categorizing the differences between water and acid, and those differences are arbitrary. Those categorizations are arbitrary. That's what you're saying. But they're not arbitrary. we can like, so okay. So listen. All right, let me explain. Everybody slow down. Chill. Just stop. Everybody stop. Just shut up. Just stop. Hold on. Slow down. Everybody slow down. Whoa. Hold on. Okay. All right. Well, like when we're talking about categorizations, okay? So say I want to, like, I notice patterns and I see that those patterns are more likely, like I see characteristics that are more likely with black people, right? Now, I could see that those are characteristics that are more likely with people in that region, right? They're all in downtown Atlanta, but they're also black people, right? I see it as black people with these characteristics, so I categorize it as black people with these characteristics. The arbitrarity of this is that actually it could be categorized based on what country they're from, not based on the fact that they're black, or it could be categorized based on downtown Atlanta, not the fact that they're black, or things like that. That's the part that is socially constructed. It's not even arbitrary, but that's why people call it arbitrary, is because they're saying you're choosing to do this based on the color of the person instead of all of these other things that you could have categorized it based on. You chose to do it based on the race of the person, right? But we categorize things based on where we're going to get the most use out of it. So if I see the same consistency from black people in Baltimore, black people in New York, and black people in LA, well now, yeah, I don't want to do it based on the fact that they're in Atlanta, because I see this is consistent based on black people now, not just based on where they're located. So the categorization is somewhat socially constructed because we're choosing to do it based on the way that we get the most utility out of it. That is true. But it's not arbitrary. We're getting the most utility out of it. So it's not arbitrary. Like, that's just how we do things. No, I'm saying we need more than water and acid. Let's label all these. Well, I don't know that we can. And that's the thing. I think that the broader labels that we have, the less chances we have of like some sort of discrimination, right? So if we're talking about the fact that we want people to be able to do these things however they want, that's fine. But when we're looking at a spectrum, right, we're not talking about like one of those like color spectrums that are like a big circle or something like that. No, we're talking about a spectrum like this. We have masculinity taking up all of this, okay? This entire side we're going to call masculine. And the same on the opposite, we're going to call this feminine, okay? This is the way that these spectrums work, and this is how we're looking at them. Now, say all of a sudden we want more categorizations. Well, the way that we would do that is instead of saying this is the most masculine thing and this is the most feminine thing, and we can just see this on a scale from one to the other, instead what we would have to do is say, okay, so here's the 90% feminine part, here's the 80% feminine part, here's the 70% feminine part, here's the 60% feminine part, here's the 50% feminine, 40%, 30%, 20%, and then 10%. Okay? Then we would do the same thing over here. 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20. Okay? So let's say we split each one of these up into 10 more categorizations. Okay? This is what it would look like. But you would have to end up somewhere on this scale in order to end up as something different. This is how we would have to chop it up. And it's impossible to actually do this. So what we also do, just to include this so people don't start freaking out, is we also say, if you're in this section right here, so you're in between the 10% of each one, you're below 10% masculinity, you're also below 10% femininity, we call that non-binary. It's because you don't feel comfortable identifying as just one or the other. You're so far into the middle that it's impossible for you to just identify as masculine or just identify as feminine, so you identify as non-binary, right? It's too hard for you to pick one or the other. But everybody outside of this blue circle is normally going to be pretty easily categorized as one or the other. And so, like, this is how, you know, again, this is the most masculine thing ever over here. Like, you know, the Hound from Game of Thrones. And then this is the most feminine thing ever, like some 50s style housewife. And we use what's called prototype theory to say how close something is to that thing. So we think of the most feminine thing ever, and if you're not the most feminine thing ever, but you're somewhere close to it, you end up somewhere on this scale, somewhere on this spectrum. And you're going to have a mix of feminine and masculine traits, but most of them will be feminine when you're over here on this side. If most of them are masculine, you're going to be over here on this side. Everybody has a mix of feminine and masculine traits. Everybody does, literally everyone. But like it just moves you farther along on one side of the scale or the other. Everything I do is neither feminine nor masculine. I simply don't exist on the spectrum. So the thing is that you do. Everybody does. You can choose not to categorize them that way, and that's fine. But the rest of the world acknowledges these patterns, and you will end up somewhere on there. If you don't identify that way, that's fine. And that's, you know, that's perfectly normal. But everybody is on the spectrum. Everybody has feminine and masculine traits. Literally everyone. There's yet to be a person in the history of humankind that didn't have feminine or masculine traits. Everybody has them. Everybody has gender. This is one of the problems with like lots of trans people where I'll be talking about gender and they'll be like, who do you think you are to talk about gender? I'm a trans person. Why don't you ask me? Like, do only trans people have gender now? Is that where we're going with this? Do I not have gender? What are you talking about? You being trans does not give you any sort of expertise on this subject. My profession gives me somewhat of an expertise on this. I wouldn't say that I'm an authority on it, though I would say I'm a lot more authoritative than anybody else that's on Twitch or YouTube or any of those other things. Although there's some people. I would say like Perspective Philosophy does really well. What's her name? Silly Serious. Like there's a bunch of people who explain these things and they all explain it the same way that I do. Anybody who's gone through like any sort of linguistic training or linguistic philosophy or these sorts of things, they're all going to view it through the same lens as I am. And that seems to be where most of the argument is and where most people have this confusion. And so this is where I focus most of the time. Gender isn't two-dimensional, Tom. It exists on a matter of degree of external confidence, internal confidence, degree of external performance. Yeah, no duh. They still... Oh my goodness. Never mind. I'm not even gonna... Nothing you said disagrees with anything I said. Okay? I'm going to leave it there. Nothing you said disagrees with anything that I said. So, thank you. If by gender you only mean masculine, feminine, gradient, then that's fine. But if people are going to take on a gender, where does the gradient come in? What does that mean to take on a gender? What does that mean? I think, like, gender exists within you. Gender is, like, something, that like exists inside of you. Right, Tom, draw the external confidence interval in measurements of degrees. That's what all of these are. That's what all of these are. Every single thing that you're going to talk about, if we're talking about gender identity, if we're talking about gender performance, if we're talking about like any sort of gendered characteristics, any of them, they will all exist on this scale right here. They will all do that. They are all maybe separate scales depending on how you're categorizing each gendered, line. And there's tons of them. We could draw millions of gendered lines, literally. I normally categorize them in 3, where I'm talking about your gender identity, your gender performance, and your biological, like gendered characteristics that are going to make you more likely to do one thing or the other. But all of those, when we're going to look and see, okay, is this masculine or feminine? They will all be here. All of them will be here on this scale. This is where we will look. This is what we're talking about. All I'm explaining right now is the difference between femininity and masculinity. That's it. That's all I'm explaining right now. That's it. So, doesn't matter which one of those things we're talking about, they will all be on a scale like this. Right? So when I say it's not like a color spectrum, I'm saying it's not this. This is not what it looks like. It's more of a scale spectrum. It's a non-binary football. Yeah. I'm getting frustrated because I don't feel... I feel like I'm explaining this the best way I possibly can. And it's made sense to everybody a million times before. But all of a sudden, this time, I have a bunch of people pretty much saying, no, you're wrong, but not explaining anything that, like, there's no disagreement with what I'm saying. And that is, like, the most frustrating thing in the world to me, is where people think they disagree with me, but they don't actually disagree with me. There's nothing more frustrating than that to me. As somebody who's trying to, like, convey ideas to people and get them to understand just at least what it is that I'm saying. As a woman, I hate sports, so I don't comprehend this football. It does look like a football. It's got the laces and everything. Yeah. Like, say you're a male who falls somewhere a little bit on the male side of the gradient, who identifies as female. Where's the gradient come on and actually matter? Well, that's what we call trans. You literally just described what we call trans, where like your identity does not match your biology. And so, but normally your identity is going to come from your brain. So it's still biological in some way, but it's not going to fit your body. That's why lots of times we'll say that like a trans person is somebody with a brain in the wrong body, because it's a it's somebody whose brain is not matching their physical appearance, and so they will still end up on this scale somewhere. And the reason that I'm saying is that we can't categorize this more is that it's like impossible to actually put all of these notches all the way down and say, oh, you're this percentage feminine, or this percentage masculine, or this is where the deer gender starts, and this is where the cuttlefish gender starts, and this is where the football gender starts. Like, it's just impossible to do that. You can't do that. And go ask anybody who identifies as something different than feminine or masculine or non-binary. Go ask any of them. Where are you on here? Where are you? Where do you end up? They can't tell you. You know why they can't tell you? Because it's not gender. This is what gender is. This is how we understand gender. This is what we communicate when we talk about gender. This is what anybody communicates. Whether you acknowledge it or not, this is what you're talking about. This is what you mean. You're talking about a scale of femininity and masculinity. And when you see somebody who looks uber masculine, you are looking at somebody who we have categorized with characteristics of masculine traits. That's like, you're looking at them and you're saying, okay, I think of you as a man because you overall seem masculine to me. Let's get that 90% up to 100. Yeah. Trans are a male but fall on the female side of the gradient. But this example, they fall on the male side but identify differently. No. What are you talking about? No. If I'm born a male, but I identify as a woman, I would be on the feminine side. There's actually studies where they show that all trans people, very rigidly, when I say trans people, sorry, all people with gender dysphoria rigidly present as the gender they identify with, and they present over here or over here. They are going to be the most masculine or the most feminine in all of their traits. Like, there are actual studies done on this to show that trans people with gender dysphoria very rigidly end up very far on the spectrum where they identify. I think a trans woman's falls on the feminine side. Right. Yeah. My belief is 0 genders or infinite genders. Either works for me. Personally, it's no gender, but infinite is another way of saying it. That's fine. Okay. I'm just you're just not saying anything. I'm just explaining how we categorize these patterns and what they mean to us. And this is why when I talk about the fact that like when we use certain words, what it is that we're communicating, not saying this is what we should communicate or this is how we should use these words. I'm explaining historically, empirically, this is how we've used these words, right? My gender belief is we spend too much energy on most of this and should just listen to people when they ask us to do something and generally let them do what they want. Yeah. Again, I'm not making a prescription as to what people should do. This is a different topic. Explain the utility, Tom. So again, for the 100th time, we recognize patterns and we categorize them. Why do we categorize them? Because it gives us utility to be able to communicate those in some way. And so we communicate them conceptually. Concept is something that comes with lots of ideas and characteristics within one idea. And so you can give an entire broad array of ideas with just one idea, right? What is a chair? Well, this right here, 100 years ago, wouldn't have been considered a freaking chair. It's got 8 legs. It's got wheels on it. It reclines. It's really tall. Looks freaking weird. Shaped oddly. Like, this wouldn't have been considered a chair. But with the concept of what we consider a chair, thinking of something 4 legs, arms, a back on it, you can sit on it. Like, is that all chairs? No, that's not all chairs. But that's like the prototype of what a chair is, right? So when we think, well, what is a chair? This chair that I'm sitting on, if over here is where the prototype sits, my chair is somewhere over here. Because it doesn't fit exactly what it is we would think of when we think of a chair. It's very different. And so the more different it is, the farther away it gets from the prototype. This is how we conceptually view concepts. This is how our brains understand concepts. Is the closest we get, or the closer we get to it, the more of that thing it becomes. And the farther away from it we get, the less of that thing it becomes. This is not rigid though, right? So I can't draw a line and say this is where chair ends. This is where chair ends. When you get this far away from the prototype, that's when it stops being a chair. You can't do that. There's very fuzzy edges on the outside of any concept to where things start to become arguable. We don't know anymore. It's in a gray area. And so we can look at things over here and we can look at something and it looks like an upside down chair, but it's behind ropes and it's in a museum or in an art center. We're like, okay, is this a chair? Because it kind of looks like a chair, but it doesn't serve the purpose of a chair. It doesn't have the utility of a chair. We can't sit on it. It looks like it's just art that's just like all mangled and just happened to come out in a similar shape as a chair. But is it a chair? I don't know. And we can have arguments over this because at the edges of a concept, at the edges of prototype theory, there is going to be a lot of things that some people will think fall into that category, some that think it doesn't fall into that category. And it's hard to tell. And there's lots of like, this is how it works. These things are not rigid. They're not like super defined to where we know this is when it stops being a chair and this is when it starts being a chair. We can't do that. Just the same with masculinity and femininity. We can't draw a hard line and say this is where you stop being masculine and start being feminine. So instead, we have a gray area. And in that gray area, we call you non-binary because it's hard to fit you into just one box. So yeah, that's my TED Talk. Sass says I need to do visual learning more often and use paint more often. So here you go. We can't recognize someone's identity using their masculine and feminine characteristics because they can clash with that in many ways. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, not all things fall under masculinity or femininity, right? Not all things are masculine or feminine. A bedspread is not masculine or feminine. It's just a thing. Chairs are not masculine or feminine. Now, can a bedspread be masculine or feminine? Yeah, sure. It can have like a hot, a picture of Pamela Anderson on it. We normally call that masculine, even though it's got a woman on it. We'd call that a masculine uh, bedspread. Why would we call it masculine? Well, what does masculine mean? Masculine means that this is a characteristic that is more common with males. That's what it means. So, like, more likely than not, if you see a bedspread with Pamela Anderson on it, you're thinking, well, that's probably a guy's bedspread. More often than not, a guy will probably buy that bedspread than a woman will buy that bedspread. Does that mean that because it's a masculine bedspread that women can't buy it? No, women can buy it. Lesbians can buy it. Women who want to hang up the bedspread is someone, some goal that they want to achieve, can buy it. Like, that doesn't mean that now, because we've categorized this thing as masculine, that now it is only for men. No, but it is masculine. Why is it masculine? Because it's more common for men than it is for women. That's it. That's all that means. You guys keep acting like these things are very like hard lines, rigid, like this is just, it's here and here and here and these things stop and end here. Like, that's not what it is. These are very broad, general things that a lot of things fall into. And some things can be argued whether or not it falls in and what, it's just, it's not as simple as you're making it sound. You said someone's identity can place them on the spectrum in a certain place regardless of their traits. Can go back and find it after the stream. Wait, I don't think I wasn't really talking about identities. I was just talking about traits. Like, when it comes to somebody's identity, normally, like, I'm just gonna go off whatever it is they tell me. Somebody can look like the most masculine person in the world. They can be the Mountain from Game of Thrones. And if they say they identify as a woman, I'm just going to call them a woman, most likely. Like, it's, I don't know. Maybe that's not true. I think that there are some points that I'll get to where I think, like, okay, this is a little bit too outrageous. I'm not going to play your game here. Because if you actually identified as feminine in any way whatsoever, you would look feminine. You would present that way. You would act that way. Like, it would exude in your presentation and in your performativity. Like, it would be there everywhere. And when we talk about performativity, we're not just talking about like a performance, like putting on a show or something like that, right? That's included in performativity, but that's not all of it. Most of performativity is performing tasks. It's performing something like putting on makeup, putting on jewelry, putting on tights, having different body language, like the talking a different way, saying certain words, not saying other words, like you are performing a task. And so that's normally what we're talking about when we're talking about performativity. But like, some people would pretty much always end up where it is they identify. If they don't, then they're trolling you. For gender to be non-arbitrary, gender identity couldn't exist. Again, dude, you're just using like different definitions for all of these words for anything you're even saying to make sense. The desire to be a certain gender is weird to me. Why can't you just do activities that you enjoy and be happy with that? Why would you want to be a certain gender? That's what you do. That's what everybody does. Everybody does certain activities that they just enjoy. And we categorize those activities. The thing is that we have we now know of this thing called gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria, the like most blatant case we had for this was this guy named John Money. Had 2 sons. I believe they were twins. One of them had like a birth defect with his penis, and they cut it off and or like turned it inside out, made it into a vagina, and then raised him as a woman. Okay. And he didn't like growing up as a girl, but never knew about this surgery. Never knew about any of this. He never knew about this. He never knew that happened, but he didn't want to be looked at as feminine. He didn't like it, and he struggled with it his entire life until he killed himself. Okay. This is like the most blatant case of gender dysphoria that we have, where somebody, their internal identity and the internal way of looking at themselves is not the external view that society has of them, and that can be infuriating. Like, it's hard for people to understand when they haven't experienced something like that. But like, imagine you go put on a wig and you put on tights and, you know, makeup and all this stuff. You dress up as a woman and you go out into public and everybody treats you as a woman. But then you pull off the wig and everything. You're like, ha, I am a man. And they're still like, no, you're still a woman. What are you talking about? Yeah, you're definitely a woman. And they still treat you as though you're a woman. And guys start coming over and hitting on you. And you're like, whoa, stop. I'm not gay. They're like, we know you're not gay. That's why we're hitting on you. You're like, what is happening? Like, this would drive you nuts. Because everybody else, the way that they're interacting with you, the way that they're categorized you, the way that they are, the way that they think about you is not the way you think about yourself. And this literally drives people to kill themselves at very high rates, because like, it's too hard to live in a world where it seems like everybody else has lost their minds. Gender is a very important part of everyone's identity. And most of us just go through life just doing the things we like, and we just do it. We don't think anything of it. And it's just that simple. And that's it. And everybody categorizes you automatically based on what it is you're doing and what you like. And it's easy because it normally aligns with your sex. So it's simple. But for those who don't, and they're not able to easily present the way that they want to be viewed, it can ruin their entire life. We're all born naked and the rest is drag. I'll find you after stream, but yeah, I respect identity out of pointlessness. But it's got nothing to do with what gender is supposed to be. I don't know what gender is supposed to be. Again, I'm not, like, you guys keep trying to make these prescriptions here, and we can do that another time or in another stream somewhere. Right now, we're just talking about what things are. You can't tell me these patterns don't exist. Sorry. You can't tell me the patterns don't exist. And so because the patterns exist, because they exist, we can categorize them. Because that's what we do. That's what humans do. So we find patterns and we categorize them. And we found these patterns and we have categorized them. And that's it. Simple as that. Now, we can also see that these patterns exist because of biology. We know that there are biological things that drive our reasoning behind these characteristics that we categorize as masculine or feminine. We can see this. And so we know that even if we try to stop categorizing them, they will still exist. And we will, again, notice the patterns and start categorizing them again. I'm heading home. I shall return in a bit. Also, no one likes being treated like a person they aren't. That includes without gender. Well, that's true. But people aren't like killing themselves at insanely high rates because a poor person isn't viewed as a rich person, right? Like, there aren't poor people with, with class dysphoria who are like, no, what? I swear I'm freaking rich, dude. I swear I'm rich. I don't have, like, it's not in my bank account, but I'm still rich. I'm still a rich person. Okay? I don't care. Like, these things aren't happening with all of these other identities. They happen with some. So things like anorexia, you can end up with body dysmorphia, but that's very different from gender dysphoria. It comes with some dysphoria, but not diagnosable dysphoria. So when we talk about the fact that like some trans people don't have dysphoria, that just means that they have dysphoria on this scale. It's just not at a level to where it's diagnosable, but they have dysphoria to the point where it drives them to identify as a different gender than the one that aligns with their sex. So, yeah.